All right, looks like we've got quite the deep dive ahead of us today.
Oh, yeah,
Reliance Industries, huh?
that's right.
Our listeners sent over, well, a whole lot of information on them.
Wow.
Yeah, we've got financial statements, company overviews.
Really big and deep.
Seems like they're serious about getting a good grasp on this company.
Definitely looks that way.
You know what? I don't blame them.
Mm,
Reliance Industries is, well, it's a giant.
that's one word for it.
And they're involved in so many different things.
Yeah, that's blue.
Makes for a very interesting deep dive, especially with all these sources.
Lots to unpack.
But hey, that's what we're here for, right? To make sense of it all.
Exactly, and hopefully make it a bit fun along the way.
That's the key. Nobody wants to drown in a sea of financial statements.
Right.
So to help us navigate this corporate ocean,
Hey, I like that.
we've got our expert who, well, let's just say they can make even a balance sheet sound exciting.
I'll do my best.
So to kick things off,
Sure.
Reliance Industries Limited, I mean, just reading that name,
What comes to mind?
powerhouse, giant.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
And I was just glancing over screener.in before we started.
What did you see there?
Well, for starters, it says Reliance Industries is India's biggest company when it comes to market cap.
Huge.
Founded by this guy, Dhirubhai Ambani, but now his son Mukesh is in charge.
That's right. Keeping it in the family.
Yeah, and the family still owns like a 50% share in the company.
Got control.
Now, they do a lot of different things, but screener.in says their main business is something called O2C.
Oil to chemicals.
It's the one.
A mouthful. But essentially, it's the core of their business.
I was wondering what that actually meant.
So basically, they take crude oil
Okay.
and through a whole bunch of processes, they refine it into all sorts of products.
Like what?
Well, you've got the fuels that power cars and planes.
Oh, right.
And then there's polymers.
Polymers.
Think plastics. The stuff that's in pretty much everything these days.
Wow, okay.
And elastomers, too.
Now, those I have no idea about.
Things like synthetic rubber used in tires.
So they're involved in a lot of, well, essential stuff.
Exactly. They touch a lot of different industries.
Essential is a good word for it.
And speaking of essential, you know what else Screener.in mentioned?
What's that?
Reliance has this massive refinery complex in Jamnagar, India.
Oh, yeah, I read
It's
that.
actually the world's largest single-site refinery.
It's hard to wrap your head around just how big that must be.
Imagine this. In FY22 alone, they processed a whopping 77 million metric tons of crude oil,
You're kidding me.
and almost 90% of that was for sale,
That's a lot of oil.
to say the least.
So they're clearly doing something right.
Right.
But then I started looking at their financials.
Oh, the numbers.
And I came across this thing, ROE.
Return on equity.
Yeah, and it seemed kind of low, like around 8.71% over the past 3 years.
Okay, so ROE is essentially a measure of how well a company uses the money invested by shareholders.
So a low ROE means...
Well, it could mean they're not being very efficient with those investments. But in the case of Reliance,
Yeah.
it's probably more related to their huge investments in newer areas.
Like what?
Well, they're putting a lot of money into green energy, for example,
Really?
and digital services as well.
So it's not necessarily a bad sign.
Right, it's more like they're playing the long game.
Betting on the future.
Exactly. And those investments might take a while to really pay off.
Makes sense.
Now, about those ventures.
Oh, you mean like their subsidiaries?
Yeah, that's a whole other rabbit hole.
Because when I saw this March 2024 audit document,
What did you find?
I was blown away. They have over 270 subsidiary companies.
Wow, that's a lot to keep track of.
Plus 44 joint ventures and 116 associates.
It's like a corporate family tree that just keeps branching out.
Seriously. And the names, some of them really caught my eye.
Like what?
Well, there's Reliance Retail, which from what I gather is huge in India.
They're everywhere. Supermarkets, electronics, fashion.
Then there's Geo Platforms
Ah, their digital arm.
and Reliance New Energy.
Yeah, that one's interesting.
It is, right. Makes you wonder what they're up to in that space.
They're making big moves in renewable energy, solar, battery storage, even green hydrogen.
So they're not just an oil company anymore.
Not at all. They're diversifying, trying to be a leader in the new energy landscape.
It's fascinating, but I have to ask, with all these subsidiaries,
Yeah.
how do auditors even begin to wrap their heads around all that?
That March 2024 document, I bet it's massive. You're telling me. But luckily, they don't have to do it all alone.
Really?
They use a network of different auditing firms.
So each firm focuses on a specific part of Reliance's business.
Exactly. It's all about making sure every piece of the puzzle is accounted for.
Like a financial checks and balances system.
You got it.
I did notice the auditors kept mentioning this word materiality.
Yes. A very important concept in auditing.
But I have to admit, I'm not exactly sure what it means.
In simple terms, it means focusing on the information that really matters.
Okay.
The stuff that could significantly impact someone's understanding of Reliance's finances.
So it's like sifting through a mountain of data and finding the gold nuggets.
You can say that.
Okay, so we've talked about their structure, ROE, and this whole auditing thing.
Right, setting the stage.
But let's get to the heart of the matter, the numbers themselves.
Time to crunch some data.
What's the story that these financial statements are telling us?
Well, for a good overview, we can look at the consolidated segment information.
Which is?
It breaks down Reliance's performance across their main segments.
Like O2C, oil and gas, retail, digital services.
Exactly. Shows us where their revenue and profits are coming from.
So which segment is the star performer?
As you might expect, O2C is still their biggest moneymaker.
Not surprising given their refining capacity.
But what's really interesting is the rapid growth we're seeing in retail and digital services.
Really?
Both of those segments are generating more and more revenue, becoming increasingly important to Reliance's bottom line.
So while oil and gas is still their bread and butter,
They're definitely branching out.
building a bridge to the future.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
And speaking of the future, those green energy initiatives we mentioned earlier.
Reliance New Energy.
That's the one. What exactly are they doing in that space?
They're investing heavily in a whole range of renewable energy technologies.
Like solar.
Solar's a big focus,
Mm.
but also battery storage and even green hydrogen.
Wow, that's ambitious.
They're aiming to be a major player in this new energy landscape.
I mean, it's a bold move going from an oil giant to a green energy pioneer.
It's a transition that's definitely worth watching.
Absolutely, but I have so many more questions.
Like what?
How are they managing this massive empire?
It's a lot to handle, that's for sure.
And how do they ensure all those subsidiaries are operating ethically, efficiently?
Big questions.
What's the future hold for Reliance as the world changes around them?
Well, that's something we'll definitely delve into as we continue our deep dive.
I can't wait.
It's going to be fascinating.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground already.
Yeah, we have.
Reliance's massive scale, their complex corporate structure,
And their ambitious green energy plans.
but there's still so much more to explore.
Absolutely.
Stay tuned because we're just getting started.
The deep dive continues.
You know, it's kind of amazing how Reliance is, well, they're so tied to fossil fuels, right?
Yeah, that's their history.
But they're making this big push into green energy.
That's a pretty big shift.
Makes me wonder how that all fits in with India's energy situation.
Oh, that's a crucial point.
Like, how does Reliance's strategy play into India's energy needs?
Well, you got to remember, India's economy is growing really fast.
Right, and with that comes a bigger need for energy. Right.
Exactly. As people's lives improve, they use more energy.
So what you're saying is Reliance's green energy investments, they're well-timed.
They're not just following a global trend.
They're positioning themselves to meet India's growing energy demands.
And with cleaner sources.
It's like they've got this huge market right there in their own backyard.
And let's not forget the impact on their image.
You mean going green could be good for business?
It could attract investors and consumers who care about sustainability.
Makes sense. But, you know, thinking about how big Reliance is,
Oh, yeah.
all those subsidiaries,
Hundreds of them.
doesn't it get kind of, I don't know, overwhelming?
Managing a company that big definitely takes some serious skill.
Like, how do they make sure everything's running smoothly?
There's always a risk of spreading yourself too thin.
That's what I'm thinking with so many different ventures.
It's a valid concern.
And then how do they even know if all those subsidiaries are doing well?
That's where those audit reports come in.
Right. The ones we talked about earlier.
Remember the concept of reliance on other auditors?
Vaguely.
Basically, Reliance uses a bunch of different auditing firms.
Each one focusing on a specific subsidiary.
Exactly, so they've got eyes on every part of the business.
To make sure everything's above board.
And to catch any potential problems early on.
So it's like a safety net,
You could say that.
making sure nobody's cooking the book, so to speak.
Those auditors, they're looking for any signs of trouble,
Like financial detectives.
trying to get the full picture of each subsidiary's health.
It's amazing when you think about it.
What
We're talking about numbers, financial statements.
Yeah.
But they're not just numbers.
They tell a story.
About Reliance's decisions, their wins, their losses.
It's all there in the data.
So let's talk about some of the key chapters in that story.
Sure.
We've touched on their efforts to reduce debt
Right.
and their move into green energy.
What else stands out?
Well, what about their digital ventures?
Geo platforms.
That seems like a big part of their strategy.
It's been a game changer for India's digital scene.
I've heard a lot about Geo.
They've captured a huge chunk of the mobile and internet market.
It seems like everyone in India uses Geo.
And they're not stopping there. They're pushing into new areas.
Like what?
Think e-commerce, digital payments, even healthcare.
They're using technology to, like, create whole new ways of doing things.
And it's all contributing to Reliance's revenue.
They're not just riding the digital wave, they're making their own wave.
Exactly. And it aligns perfectly with India's Digital India initiative.
What's that?
The government's push to make India a more digitally empowered society.
So Reliance is benefiting from government support.
And their efforts are helping India achieve its goals.
It's like a win-win situation.
You often see that in emerging markets.
What do you mean?
Companies like Reliance, they have the resources and influence to really shape a country's economic path.
It's kind of mind-blowing.
It is.
But I still have this nagging feeling.
What is?
Reliance, even with all these new ventures, they're still pretty reliant on oil and gas, right?
That's true.
What happens if the world moves away from fossil fuels faster than they expect?
That's a big question mark.
Like, is that a vulnerability for them?
Investors are definitely thinking about that.
Because they're green energy investments, they're important, but...
It's a long-term game.
And in the meantime, they're still exposed to the risks of the fossil fuel industry.
Reliance knows that. And their green energy push is partly about mitigating that risk.
So they're trying to build a future where they're not so dependent on oil.
It's a balancing act, for sure.
Speaking of balancing acts,
What's on your mind?
let's talk about their retail business.
Reliance Retail.
They're everywhere in India.
Supermarkets, electronics, fashion, you name it.
It's like they've got a store on every corner.
Their retail strategy has been incredibly successful.
But the competition's fierce.
Oh, yeah, you've got global players like Amazon trying to get a piece of the pie.
So how's Reliance Retail holding up against those giants?
Well, if you look at the numbers,
The consolidated segment information.
that's the one. Their retail segment is growing rapidly. It's becoming more profitable, too.
So they're doing something right.
They've figured out how to offer a unique mix of products and services.
Catering to different types of customers.
And they've blended their online and offline operations really well.
So they're fighting Amazon online, but also dominating in physical stores.
They're covering all their bases.
Plus, they really understand the Indian market.
They know what Indian consumers want.
And they've even tapped into rural markets.
Reaching customers that others might have overlooked.
Reliance, they just don't stop, do they?
They're ambitious, that's for sure.
It's pretty inspiring to see.
It is. Their success is a testament to their drive and vision.
Makes me think about the future of Reliance.
What about it?
We've talked about what they're doing now.
Their current businesses, their challenges.
What about the long term?
What does the future hold for them?
That's what I'm wondering. Can we predict where they're headed?
It's tough to say for sure, but
Yeah, we can look at the trends.
we can analyze the information we have.
And maybe get a glimpse of what might be coming next.
So what do you think? What's the future of Reliance Industries?
Well, for one thing, that whole global energy transition.
Yeah, that's going to be a big factor.
Will they really become a green energy leader?
That's the question everyone's asking.
It's a critical moment for them and for the world, really.
And their journey's not over yet.
What else will shape their destiny?
What challenges will they face?
Will they continue to thrive in this crazy, ever-changing world?
Those are questions we'll explore in our final segment.
Sounds like things are about to get even more interesting.
Buckle up, we're diving even deeper.
All right, so we've gone deep into Reliance Industries.
Oh yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
Their history, their financials, all their different ventures.
And let's not forget the sheer scale of their ambition.
Exactly. But now, it's time to look ahead.
To the future.
What's next for Reliance Industries?
Well, predicting the future is a tricky business.
Always is.
But based on everything we've learned so far, we can definitely see some interesting trends emerging.
And some potential scenarios.
Right possibilities.
So give us a glimpse into the crystal ball.
Where do you see Reliance heading?
Well, one thing that keeps coming back to me
Yeah.
is that global energy transition we talked about.
Oh, absolutely. That's going to be a major factor.
Can Reliance really pull it off?
Pull what off?
Transforming from an oil giant into a true green energy leader.
That's the billion-dollar question.
It's a huge challenge, right?
It is, no doubt about it.
I mean, they're making those investments in solar, battery storage, green hydrogen.
Promising signs.
But there are so many hurdles.
What do you mean?
Regulations, technology changing so fast.
And consumer behavior, too. It's all evolving.
It's a high-stakes game they're playing.
And the stakes are only getting higher.
And they're not just playing this game in India.
Right. Their actions have global implications.
What do you mean?
They can become a major force in the worldwide clean energy market.
It's kind of mind-boggling to think about.
It is.
But we can't forget about India itself.
What about it?
Their economy is growing, their middle class is expanding.
Huge potential market for Reliance.
Especially for their retail and digital businesses.
Exactly. Reliance Retail and Geo platforms are perfectly positioned to capitalize on that growth.
Because as people in India have more money,
they're going to spend more.
On everything, from groceries to gadgets to online services.
Reliance is right there, ready to meet those needs.
It's almost like they have this sixth sense.
What do you mean?
For knowing what Indian consumers want.
They definitely have a deep understanding of the market.
And they're always innovating, using technology to stay ahead of the curve.
Oh yeah, they're not afraid to embrace new ideas.
Things like artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things.
Even 5G.
All of that is going to play a role in their future.
It'll be interesting to see how they leverage those technologies.
But even with all that innovation, all that success,
there are bound to be challenges.
Of course, nobody's perfect.
They'll face competition, both in India and globally.
Regulations could change.
And then there are geopolitical risks, always lurking in the background.
It's a lot to juggle.
Managing a company like Reliance, it's a constant balancing act.
Between growth and risk, innovation and uncertainty.
It's a fascinating story, and it's still being written.
And that's what I love about these deep dives.
What do you mean?
We get to explore these companies, understand their complexities.
See how they fit into the bigger picture.
And in the case of Reliance, that bigger picture is pretty huge.
It is. They're a reflection of India's economic rise, its growing influence on the world stage.
And their success or failure will have ripple effects far beyond India's borders.
So, why should our listener care about all of this?
That's a good question. What's the takeaway for someone who might not be directly involved in the Indian market?
Reliance Industries is more than just a company.
It's a symbol of something larger?
It's a microcosm of the challenges and opportunities facing businesses in a rapidly changing world.
A world grappling with climate change, technological disruption, and geopolitical shifts.
Reliance's story is a story about navigating those complexities.
About adapting, innovating, and striving for success in the face of uncertainty.
And that's a story that resonates with all of us.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Reliance Industries,
we want to leave you with one final thought.
A question to ponder.
Given everything we've discussed, their green energy push, their technological advancements, their deep understanding of the Indian market, do you think Reliance Industries can truly transform themselves
from a fossil fuel giant
to a global leader in sustainable solutions?
That's a question for our listener to consider.
As they continue to follow Reliance's journey.
It's been a fascinating deep dive.
I learned a lot.
Reliance Industries, they're a company that's constantly evolving, pushing boundaries.
And their story is far from over.
So, to our listener, thank you for sending us down this rabbit hole.
It's been a pleasure exploring it with you.
And who knows, maybe in a few years, we'll be back for another deep dive into Reliance Industries.
To see how they've adapted and grown.
Because one thing's for sure, their journey is just getting started.
And we can't wait to see where it takes